One more week left to go, and it's been an interesting season, and we still have races that are not complete yet for the playoffs. We're going to talk about all of that today, and a couple of other items that have shown up in our news this week for LG, AHL, PSN, as we talk about the final week of the regular season leading up to the playoffs for season number 4. Hi everyone, T-Sibs with you along with Vibes and MGM. We are here today to talk about what has gone on through 8 weeks and the couple of races that are still up for grabs, and some teams rocketing forward with great momentum like the Wild heading into the playoffs, and some teams who are struggling trying to make the playoffs like the Bridgeport Sound Tigers. Vibes, MG, how you guys doing today?
I'm pumped. I'm ready to go. We're getting ready down to the playoffs. I am ready. Let's do this.
Vibes might be on his best behavior today.
My mom's listening today. How about that? My mommy is tuning into the show. Hey, Ma. Love you, Ma.
He can't be as bad as we think he is he? I guess we'll find out.
Oh, no. She knows me. She knows me.
So yeah, I mean, we've got a lot going on. The competition for playoffs this season. My initial thought about this is, it feels like season 4, the competition right down to the end, tighter than we've seen in the other seasons. MG, do you agree with that, or what's your assessment of how it's been all season long in the AHL?
Yeah, I'd say there's always been a few races down to the finish in previous seasons, but there seems to be quite a few this year. It seems like there's 4 or 5 teams that are all still in it and fighting for a final spot in their division.
Well, plenty going on that we have to talk about with teams. Again, I think what we talked about earlier in the season was about balance of talent. And how we feel like there's a lot more players in the league. We know that the sign-up has been tremendous over the last couple of seasons, especially on the PSN side. And so, there seems to be certainly a bigger pool, and maybe that's part of the reason that we're getting this kind of competition. Does that still hold true, Vibes? We've had that discussion before. Is this season so competitive because of the level of talent that we see along the way?
Yeah, I mean, we've touched on it several times, but yeah, I mean, I think that the influx of players and the spectrum of players that are available is increasing. And then also, I think it's a matter of the cream rising to the top. I know it's cliche, but the better players are moving upward, and the lesser players, such as myself, are moving downward. So, what we're seeing is everyone just being where they belong, and it's creating a really excellent level of competition.
Well, we got a lot to talk about with teams today, and I want to start before we talk about specifics of certain teams. With the playoffs coming up, we saw an issue. We'll talk about in a few minutes in more detail. We saw an issue with the Toronto Marlies, who wound up losing their top goaltender, Mello, who quit this week. He, when you're a big top team like that and you lose your top goaltender, they wound up calling up West Side Hockey, but we were speculating yesterday, what happens if you don't have somebody on your TC that you can bring up to be that second goaltender? What do you wind up doing with your ECUs? And we'll get on to the bigger question of when something like that happens, what should be the rule. But let's just talk about ECU in this instance. You lose your goaltender, you've got nobody you can bring up full time. How do you wind up managing this, Vibes?
Well, that's when you get to see, the better management come to the forefront because, in a situation like that, someone who doesn't have good tabs on things is going to lose it a little bit, where the guy who does have his head in the game is going to be able to stagger his ECUs and do the best that he can to facilitate his team. But on the other hand, if you don't have the ECUs, then what do you do? If you don't have the guy sitting there on the TC ready to go, then what do you do? You know?
Right.
Well, especially in a situation like Toronto losing a goaltender. Um, this come playoff time, I mean, they can only use their ECU goalies once per round, twice over, and 12 all in the playoffs. I mean, they make a long push into the playoffs. They're going to have to forfeit games because they're not going to have enough goaltenders to ice.
No.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. I feel bad if I would have felt really bad for Toronto if they had to do that. Bad enough already that you want to lose a goaltender, a top one, but to have to then figure out how you're going to juggle these guys around and make it work is even tougher. Let's talk about the more specific issue with Toronto and the Marlies losing Mello. Without getting into any specifics about it, basically he was having some issue with treatment. Let's just say treatment by, I guess, his organization. We'll just leave it generic at that. And deciding at this point that he felt it was worth leaving and not dealing with it any longer. Uh, it's a tough one. Let's just talk about if you're him. I mean, what would lead you to leave in the middle of us, or not in the middle, towards the end of a regular season right now, as your team is about to hit the playoffs, and one of the best teams in the league, maybe arguably the best team. What would cause you, MG, to make a decision like that at this point?
I would probably think that it's not something that's just happened recently. I would think that this is probably something that he's been dealing with all season. I would guess. I mean, I don't know, but to quit when you're having such a strong season and you're going into the playoffs in such a good position, it would have to be something pretty severe. I would think.
I know what can cause it.
Go ahead.
Estrogen.
Wow. So you
Put your
don't
big girl panties on.
so you don't think that there's anything bad enough that could have been happening with him and maybe management, maybe teammates that warrants at this point to leave?
Uh, at this point, man, 2 weeks heading into the playoffs, I mean, this is something that should have been resolved long ago. If it was that serious, it should have been resolved a long time ago, right?
I mean, if everybody quit every time they came across a douchebag on their team, we wouldn't have anybody playing in this league right now. So,
Yeah,
Yeah, no kidding.
yeah. If I ran away from all the douchebags in life, I'd be curled up under the blanket right now. Like again, like I don't want to be a broken record and be the guy that just says, get over it. But get over it. Don't
Ye-
quit on your team.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess that brings up. I mean, should we have like safe space teams for guys that are fragile and can't handle um, the real world? I mean,
well,
we have to take feelings into account at some point, do we not?
it's 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 probably more realistic than you think, but it's I'm sure at some point that's going to happen. I mean, yeah, maybe again because I'm older and my way of thinking in 20 years could be totally outdated and would just absolutely shunned. But I think we're heading that way, MG. I think that's unfortunately. Uh, I think a lot of people are brought up to believe that they are, right about everything. And then when they start having to deal with issues and they don't have anybody to protect them, it's a lot harder for them these days to deal with whatever's going on. Look, if something bad enough is happening that you feel like you've got to quit the team at the end while the team is doing incredibly well, to almost at the end of the season. I got to believe, as you guys have already kind of said, there's got to be sooner intervention. A couple of weeks back, I'm talking to my team. If I can't get them to treat me better, then I'm talking to the league. If it's that kind of an issue, and I don't know, and then if you can't get it resolved at that point, then I'd be looking to try and get them to trade me off. Put in that trade request before the trade deadline was last week. What? It was a week or 2 weeks now past.
2 weeks ago, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean that's what I'd be doing. I'd be trying to get myself off the team, and you can't tell me that things have gotten so bad in the last 2 weeks that now it's time to quit.
Especially Melo has a 2-season contract where he can force a trade. I mean, if he really wanted out, he could have asked for a trade, and they would have had to move him. So
now, did he sign that contract this season?
Yeah, he's still got season 4, 2-year contract, 1 remaining.
So
zero trade requests.
Certainly at the beginning of the season, the management and he were okay for him to have signed that contract whenever he did sign it. I've got to believe that was not an issue then.
I mean, we have to also take into account that LG banned him for 3 seasons, obviously for quitting without any real cause. I mean, if he had justifiable cause to be quitting, they wouldn't have banned him for 3 seasons.
Right. That's it's unfortunate, and certainly a lot of things have been said in the shout box, and we hear from people here and there, and so you say, okay, well, what's actually happening, and what is the real situation with it? Whatever it is, he's having an issue with something. Didn't feel like it was worth continuing to go through, and so he now is out until the end of season 6, and that's obviously you can buy your way out of most of it, I think. I don't know how hard the league is going to hold up on this one, but let's get away from how Melo has dealt with this and talk about what Toronto does moving forward. Obviously, they called up West Side Hockey, who is a fairly good goaltender and has had some success, but I think you pretty much have to go with your goaltender that remains at this point. And right now it's Watermelon, so he's 17-10, 2.56 goals against. Has certainly played well and has the ability to be a leading goaltender. But this is, that's pretty much all the Marlies can do at this point. But they're going to have to, I don't know. Do they figure out what to do differently on defense? Is there, does your goaltender that's going to be in there now affect what defenses you play in a short series?
It absolutely could. If Melo was the type to be able to, make the big save where he doesn't have such tight defense, then, if this goalie can't, then you got to tighten up. It could change a lot of things. That's why Melo splitting on his team is it's huge, and just reverbing back to the whole situation with him. Okay, so he's got a ban till season 6, but doing something like this could really affect you even more than that. Because I'm telling you right now, I'm pulling out my Chris Jericho list and I'm writing his name down because I would never want a player like that to have anything to do with any team that I'm running. And you have to think that most managers kind of feel the same way. At least, the ones with a good head on their shoulder would. Because, listen, if the guy can be good, that's one thing. And sure, that's appealing. But if he's going to just leave you high and dry like that, he's useless. So,
right.
Write this guy's name down and make sure that this is more than just a 3-season ban. Make sure that, this guy has a tough time getting back in and doesn't ever leave his next team, because that's not okay.
It's certainly tough for Toronto moving forward. Team like we said, a team that certainly had the option. The opportunity to maybe win this whole thing. You lose, again, arguably maybe one of the best goaltenders this season. That's a big hit, and I don't know what they're going to have to do to make up for that. Fortunately, when you lose a goaltender, you're not losing chemistry on the line. So I guess that's a benefit of it being a goaltender. They're by themselves. If you've got other goaltenders that can play in and play well, you'll be okay. I suppose that's the saving grace of losing that position.
Well, I
Yeah.
think to a certain extent, though, you've got some chemistry between your goaltenders and your defensemen. I mean, if your goalie and your defenseman aren't on the same page in certain situations, I mean that can make a big difference when you're taking a 2-on-1, or you're trying to cut off a breakaway, and your goalie goes for the cross crease when you have that covered. And, I think it can make a bit of a difference, anyways.
Yeah, but a lot of the chemistry between a defender and goalie is kind of baked into the game of hockey, So, I mean, I
I've
get I
I've
get what
played
you're
with some
saying.
stupid goalies in my day that don't understand what I'm doing, coming back and trying to help them out, and
All right, so
it,
let me
it
rephrase. It should be baked into the game of
yeah.
hockey.
So obviously, Toronto, they're going to have to work with West Side, and I would say at this point right now, you get him into as many practices with the expected defenders that he's going to have to play with, because he needs to get used to them. He needs to know what to expect out of the guys who are going to be in front of him. Then
It'll be interesting
West,
to see what it's Watermelon's story is, because I think he statistically, I mean, save percentage wise and goals against average, he's been a better goalie than Mello, but Mello's played quite a bit more this season. So I wonder if there's a scheduling issue with Watermelon as far as why he's not getting as many starts, and I wonder if that will affect them going forward into the playoffs.
well,
um,
go ahead.
they're saving grace. West Side's a good goalie. I don't know how familiar you guys are with him, but he's a good goalie. If he's got a good defense, he's a good goalie.
He was
So,
on our TC last year in Tucson, and he definitely has some skills. We'll see. I mean, this is a golden opportunity for him to show what he's
mhm.
capable of doing, and whether or not he should be somebody who should be considered for the AHL. It's not just a chance to win with a team like Toronto, but this could be setting himself up for next season.
Yeah.
I mean, well, he's played 5 games with Toronto so far this season, and he's
Right.
1-4 with a 75% save percentage and 4.21 goals against average in 5 games. I think at the AHL level, I wouldn't say he's really proven himself to be a starter or even a backup. I mean, he went 4-11 last year in season 3.
Right.
I think this is a pretty big hit to Toronto going into the playoffs. I think this is gonna dramatically reduce their chances of pushing for the cup.
Yes and no, because if you give Westside a good defense, he's a good goalie. If you give him a mediocre defense, he tends to overmove, and he moves a lot more than he has to, and then he can be a pretty bad goalie. So a lot of it's going to come down to their defense.
Just for reference, and you guys talked about how many games that Watermelon has played so far. He's played 26, which is the same amount of games I've played. He's 17-10, 2.56 goals against. Right now, I'm 19-7, 2.46. For me, there's nothing. It's not about availability. It's been about whatever the Bears management has wanted to do that week. And most weeks they want to play Moose Eponymous 6 games. There have been a couple where they played him 5. And I've been cool with playing 3 games a week. I'm perfectly fine with that. So it could be just that Mello was the hot hand. Let's go with him. Watermelon has been okay with the workload he's gotten. But I don't know what teams Watermelon's played. But if he has not played a lot of the better teams, this could be a bigger problem for Toronto than we already realize it
It
is.
it looks
Well,
like Watermelon is in our live chat right now, and
yeah,
apparently he's saying that his availability is bad.
Okay, yeah. So he's saying, he can only play Sunday, maybe 10:30 games. So that's why he was back up. Okay, so that's a good. Well, he's the one guy who's actually in chat, so it's a good thing he's there. Um, and so so it depends. Obviously it did depend on what the issue is. Hopefully he's available more for Toronto. But if that's still the case during the playoffs, that is absolutely going to be a problem for the Marlies. We'll have to see how they wind up scheduling when the playoffs come up and go from there. But that obviously big story with Melo quitting this week, and for all you who think they might want to quit, you might want to rethink about it if it's a 2-season ban. If you don't want to spend $70 to get back into the league again, you may want to just ride this one out for another week. Let's move on to some of the other teams that we want to talk about. I want to talk about another solid team that has played well this season, obviously all season long, and we talked about them a bit during the trade deadline, mostly because they didn't do much of anything at the trade deadline, and that was the Iowa Wild, who right now, as we take a look at the, let's see, they are in the Western standings. We see Iowa on top of Cleveland right now, 3 points ahead of them. They're on an 11-game winning streak, and 57-13-2 is their total record. The Wild leading that tough Western Central right now, and as we said, 11-game winning streak for the team right now. They haven't had, I don't believe they've had a losing week at all this season. No, not one losing week yet. And they've also won 13 out of their last 14 games, and of course this week beating some pretty good teams, beating the Marlies 3-2, taking down St. John's big time. A couple of other teams like San Antonio they beat, and Utica, who's a pretty good team. So they're handling themselves in and out of their division, playing incredibly well. They're hot at a point where they really do want to be hot, but they've got a week coming up where they're going to be taking on Stockton and Chicago and Cleveland and Charlotte, looking for a playoff spot. And if Manitoba's still looking for a spot in the last game of the season, they've got to play them as well. So this week coming up is not going to be so easy for them. But the Iowa Wild so far this season, guys, have made moves here and there, but they've been pretty well set with the guys that they have there on that team. And Mecca has done a nice job as GM this season. And we spoke to Riverdale Stomp, who is now Juggy Nuts on the site, a couple of weeks back. And this team seems to have a lot of good chemistry going, and it's all happening at the right time.
They're a good team. They've been good all year, you know.
I think this is also a team that's been obviously a few pieces changed here and there, but this is a team that's been put together over the last couple of seasons. A lot of the same players playing in Iowa, especially last year and this year. You get that kind of chemistry that obviously that it speaks for itself with their record.
So if you're going up against the Wild in the playoffs, I mean, what kind of, you look at the talent that they have on this team, including some really good defense. Bubba 17 has been solid all season long. He's at a plus 29. Nobody's at a negative on this team in plus minus, which is astounding when you look at that. What do you? I mean, you can't necessarily go after a line here with this team if you're going to play them in this coming week or in the playoffs. Yeah, how do you approach a team that seems to be pretty solid up and down?
Well, I'm laughing because it's almost like you took the thoughts right out of my head. Is where do you attack this team? There's really no, the weakest point is always the point of insertion. But where's the weak point on this team? Right. I don't know. If I was going against this team as a manager, I'd have to really think about things because I'm just off the top of my head, I don't know where it is. They're a team that could beat you with three solid lines. They have scoring throughout their entire scoring roster, and then they got a solid defense and good goaltending. So, where's the weakest link? I don't know. I'd have to phone a friend.
Yeah, Skyhawk and OMG Price, two very solid goaltenders. Price 35-5, 35-5, 2.08, 81.9% save percentage, and then Skyhawk, who last I looked, was tied with me for shutouts in the league. He is 23-11, 2.54, 79.5 save percentage. You don't get a break against them with goaltending at all.
Also, yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of people questioning moving Rask for Skyhawk before the deadline there. But Skyhawks only lost one game since they acquired him at the deadline.
I think it's. I think it was a good move. I like Rask a lot. He was. I think he was up in the NHL for some part of this year. And he's a solid goaltender, but I don't think he's been as good in 17 as he was in 16. And
there's a reason why.
Well, is there a specific reason why, or is it a generic reason why?
There's a very specific reason why.
Okay.
Especially with the last patch. It's because with the last patch, what EA wanted to do was they wanted to award the goaltenders who actually play goalie. Mm-hmm. You know, those who cut off their angles, who come out, challenge shots, and play goaltender. Rask never really played goaltender. He sat in the middle, in 16. And in 16, it played itself towards the middle sitter. And in 17, especially post this last patch, it's taken that out of the game a little bit, which is why he hasn't been as effective.
And I think, and that's generally where I was going with it as well. And I think, I think that's been the case for quite a few goaltenders who were very solid in 16. Some of them took a while to get used to 17, and some of them are still struggling with it. I think when you look at Skyhawk's numbers and what he was doing so far this season, if you can get somebody like that, and somebody wants the name of Rask, then you've got to make that move. And I think that's exactly what they did, and I think it was a very smart move by Mecca and the management of the Wild to get somebody like that at this point.
Absolutely.
Well, the Wild does certainly, again, 11-game winning streak going into Week 9. Some tough games coming up this week, but they know they're in the playoffs. They've got a chance to juggle some things around, maybe get some feel for how maybe other guys might want to play together, or they just leave it alone. Vibes, you're GMing this team. They've been going well so far. You've got a week left. That doesn't necessarily mean an awful lot to you, except for maybe breaking the point streak, maybe breaking the win streak that Rockford set 2 seasons ago. Other than that, what you're playing for, do you worry about doing anything different with this team? Do you just leave it alone and let it ride, or do you try and see if there are any combinations that might work better?
For the past 3 weeks, and I mean, I'm willing to bet it's what they've been doing, considering who their management is. But you just work out the kinks, you know what I mean? I would say probably for the last week or two, at least. This team has not really cared about what the standings look like. And it's all about just ironing out those kinks and trying to get it to where it is the same guys constantly playing together, try and work on availability and things like that. And after that, just let the monster be,
MG, what do you do with your team that when they're sitting on the precipice of possibly breaking some records for the season? Do you let that ride out for week number 9, and so they've got something to shoot for the week, or do you do anything differently to try and figure some things out before the playoffs?
I would think maybe in previous seasons, you maybe had more of the luxury to go for some of those records. But I think with the amount of competition going into the playoffs this year, I think you have to do everything you can to make sure your team is ready. I don't think there's going to be an easy series going into these playoffs, so I think they have to take all the time they have to prepare and be ready to battle going into the playoffs.
Well, we wish Iowa the best. Obviously, they're doing pretty well, and we've got some really top teams in this league right now who sit on top of their divisions and who are really dominating at this point. As we said, Toronto being one of them, but now they have a bit of a hurdle to have to deal with. But, when you look at the standings, and just want to take a quick look at the Eastern standings, you see Hershey well on top in Eastern Atlantic right now. Toronto, as we mentioned, they've got Syracuse 4 points behind them, and we haven't talked a lot about them in recent time, but the Crunch have a pretty solid team as well, and on a little bit of a win streak as well. Binghamton right behind them. But, again, Toronto and Hershey solid in their divisions. Iowa, Cleveland certainly really at the top of the Western Central by a lot. And then Stockton in the Western Pacific, a team that we've seen play a couple of times and talked about a good deal. Another team that is really solid. Is this a season that we see these top teams that we've seen play so well all season long? Are they going to make it through? Are we going to get number ones all the way through when we get to the Final Four? Or is that not going to happen?
That's a tough call. I mean, anything.
Ooh, I feel like we're putting the carriage before the horse a little bit. I don't know if I'm willing to say that quite yet, but wait, did I say carriage? Anyway, I do have a prediction. Like I know it's early, but I have a Calder Cup winner. I'm not going to tell you who that is just yet, but I do have a Calder Cup winner. I will tell you this, that they are a current division leader. So I mean, maybe that kind of goes to what you're asking. I don't know if it's going to be like a clean sweep, but I do have a Calder Cup winner.
You do.
They are the leader. Yeah, I do.
You're going to put that in an envelope and have it sealed and notarized on the date that you did it.
Yeah, then we'll announce it and we'll find out it was wrong.
Well, look, every season so far has been that way. I mean, we've seen leaders come and go, and then all of a sudden, Charlotte had a good team, but did any of us really think that they were going to win the whole thing last season? I don't know about that. I know some people did call it.
Yeah. What's his face? I'm drawing a blank right now.
I know Mystic Mac called
Mystic Mac. Him, yes. Right, that's the guy. I'm sorry, I had an old moment. Yeah, him. He called it, so I got to give him his respect, but he's the one that called it out, and he was right, so. But I didn't. I sure as hell didn't.
Well, I think we're going to find out soon enough whether or not these top teams. I don't know. I think this is a season where these top teams, these 4, 5, maybe 6 top teams that we're seeing right now, they're going to make up that. They're going to make up that semifinal and final. I don't know. I have a hard time from what I've seen from games this season. I have a hard time seeing these teams get beaten in a series. Getting beaten once off absolutely happens all the time, but in a series, I don't know. I'm going to tell you right now. I think of the teams that I just mentioned. Let's see, Hershey, Toronto, Iowa, Cleveland, Stockton, maybe throw in Syracuse as well. I think of those 6 teams, I think you're going to see the Final Four in here somewhere.
Yeah, I would agree to that. I would say yes to that.
I get the feeling MG doesn't agree with that.
I don't want to agree with it, but it's hard to argue. There's just a lot of power going into this off season or the postseason.
I can tell you who's not going to win it.
Chicago would probably be the
Lehigh
answer.
Won't be winning it.
Okay, that was the other possibility.
Lehigh will not be winning it this year.
Well, there you go. That may be the most accurate you've been all year.
Yeah.
I did just a quick note here. It looks like Columbus has sent down another player to Cleveland. That's 15.
Yeah, and I know Pestilence just mentioned that in the YouTube shout box. So thanks for that information. And the rich get richer, I think, is what we keep on saying about this team.
I think Madden's is listening too, so I should let him know that Chicago won't be winning it either.
Yeah, I'm sure we will be hearing from him shortly. Yeah, it's there's a team that looked gangbusters, and we've talked about that about the Wolves on and off. I think even guys on their team would have to admit. Now I'm a bit shocked at how much losing HJHF, him getting called up was a big loss for them, probably more than anyone would have thought. But I definitely think that has been a tremendous part of killing the chemistry a little bit for that team.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Let's move on
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's move
Yeah,
on
I'm
to
sorry.
let's move on to the three races really that are critical at this point right now. You've got in the East Bridgeport and Springfield, who are right on the border. As we take a look again at the standings, you've got Springfield ahead by 3 points. They have the same amount of wins, these two teams. They're on a 2-game winning streak, while Bridgeport, 8 games in a row now, they've lost 11 out of their last 12. As we said, 3 points back of Springfield for the last spot in the Eastern Atlantic playoff race. And,
can they get it together, Sibs? Can they get in?
Well, I think Bridgeport has good, it has a lot of good talent, and I think they have good management as well. How they wind up dealing with what's going on over the last several weeks is up to them. They wound up losing to San Jose last week. Losing to Stockton is not a surprise, or the Golds, or even San Antonio, but you've got to beat San Jose. Bakersfield obviously is a tough matchup as well, but those are the games that you have to try and steal a little bit. But San Jose is a team that you've got to beat. They lost to Ontario as well last week. Those are games that they had to win. If they could have won those 2 games, they'd be about tied or right with Springfield. And in that 8-game losing streak, that's who they've lost to. You've got to be more competitive in those games. You've got to take Ontario and San Jose. And then you've got to try and steal a San Antonio game if you can.
Yeah.
Well, it should be interesting. Looks like they're getting a bit of help from the Islanders. They've sent down Derms, 18, yep, and Sunshine, 26-44, going into the final week. So I think that those are two good players that can both help them make a push for the playoffs in this final week.
Yeah,
is that going to be enough though? Because I mean, excuse me for being so blunt, but they got a bad defense. Is their offense going to be able to, with all due respect to their defense, but
I didn't see any respect at all for the defense there.
Well, that's why I said all due respect, because you don't really deserve any until you play a little bit better.
I got you.
But I don't know. They've had a bad defense.
Well, that was not the case. I mean, we talked about them several weeks ago when they made a bunch of moves and picked up some players that bolstered their defense at the time, and I felt like they had made some pretty solid moves. For whatever reason, their defense has struggled a little bit. But you mentioned picking up a couple of those players, Derms and Sunshine. Hopefully, guys who are a little more defensive minded and can help out on the offense. Obviously, Derms being a center and Sunshine being a right wing, maybe they can come back a little bit more. I mean, I think if your defense is struggling, that's what you kind of need a little bit more. Is if you can't move players, then you've got to change the way you play, and maybe they need a little bit more support from the front lines when they play.
Yeah.
So, Bridgeport, 8-game losing streak, really struggling, and their schedule this week coming up. They've got St. John's tonight in their first game, one that they have to take, but then they've got Hershey in game 2. They've got WBS on Tuesday, but then Rochester. Then they play Syracuse and then Springfield Tuesday night, the late game, which is going to be may very well be one that's still, between two close teams who are trying to beat each other out. So that's going to be a fun one to watch.
It's going to be huge.
Then they've got Hartford, Lehigh Valley, possibly Albany could be wins for them. Providence is a tough game. They're a pretty damn good team. So they don't have an incredibly tough schedule this week. They've got one that's workable for them, but they cannot, they need to get out of this funk. And when you lose that many games in a row, it's really hard to turn it around with the final week coming up.
Yeah.
So Bridgeport and
even if they do squeeze into the playoffs, which is it's going to be a big task, making any kind of dent in the actual playoffs is going to be next to impossible with the caliber of teams. I mean, I suppose within their division, but I mean, even if they squeeze into that fourth place, I don't see them having a chance of taking out Hershey and an upset in the first round.
Right. Meanwhile, on the other side, Springfield this past week going 6-3, beating Bakersfield, shutting out San Antonio, shutting out Tucson, two games in a row with shutouts, barely losing to Texas and San Diego, but beating Stockton on Wednesday night, the late game. So they are beating some good teams and right now playing really good hockey. The swing right now, Vibes, is on Springfield. And meanwhile, Bridgeport is struggling. That to me says unless Bridgeport finds a way to really turn it around this week and find a couple of wins in week 9, they're going to be out of this.
They picked a hell of a time to start going on a schneid, and I don't know. I think that the 4 in this division are the 4 that we see. I think it's. I think it's curtains for Bridgeport. I know you've been a fan all the year, whole season, but I think that it's GG for them.
On the other races to talk about here, we've got Charlotte and Manitoba, and so certainly with MG here, we could talk about what's coming up for this week. As we take a look at the West and the Western Central specifically, Charlotte is ahead 2 points on Manitoba. They are not far behind Chicago as well. So let's throw all 3 of these teams into the mix. I'm going to let Vibes take this one first because I think I'm going to find it interesting what he's going to say. Chicago.
Oh boy, Chicago. Am I excited about this? Let me tell you. At one point I'd have told you that Chicago was done. I heard it. You could hear it in Zeus's voice that even he knew that they were done. But then they had a good week. They had a good week that week when they beat Texas, and I forget who else they beat. But they played a lot of pretty good teams that I thought, at the state of their team, I thought they were going to lose. But they ended up winning. So Chicago has somehow figured out a way to turn this thing around a little bit. And at this point, I think Chicago gets in, and I think it comes down to Manitoba and Charlotte. And, I mean, I don't know. I got to go with Charlotte. But, Manitoba might be able to pull something out. They got Puck Zone over there, and Puck Zone's been, he's been knocking the puck in all season. So
it should be noted he's been in IR too, only playing minimal games in the last couple weeks. So he's off IR this week.
Okay, so he's off IR, and you put him into the mix with what they got left, and maybe they can get it done. But I think that the 4 you see in this division are the 4 you're going to get too. I'm sorry, MJ. I know that probably you don't agree or you don't like.
Somebody's always got to be wrong, Vibe. So
right, and I mean that's why I have debates with people so that they can be wrong, and I'm right. Someone's got to be wrong. So, but I think that's your 4 there too as well.
It's funny. Chicago has not had a winning week since week 3. They have gotten no more than 4 wins a week. Last week, no exception, although, of course, their game against Albany had to be pushed off until tonight. So Chicago actually has an extra game than everybody else this week. They're playing an 8:30 game against Albany tonight. But they just have not been able to do much of anything. They're not pulling away from anybody. They're losing a little bit just about every week, and have not been able to come back on a run. Now, to be noted, they did beat Utica. They beat Toronto this past week, which is a nice win. So, a couple of wins, and Binghamton, no pushover there for sure. So they beat a couple of teams this week that are pretty solid, but then they got blown out by Stockton 8-0. So
they also lost to Rochester and
Right.
St. John's too.
Yeah. Exactly.
Which is why I think this team gets in, but they're a one and done. I don't want to get too much into predictions and the playoff predictions, but
that'll be next week.
That'll be next week. But I think this team does get in, and I think they're out in the first round. That's my feelings on the situation.
I'm gonna say something. I'm gonna say something I don't normally say, MG. I agree with your vibes.
Yeah,
I think that's probably.
I know it happens every once in a while. People agree with me, and it turns out to be a defining moment in their life. So this is big.
No, I feel a little sick to my stomach actually right now. But go while I recover, MG. Go ahead.
If we look at the final schedule, the final week for all three of these teams, I would say that Chicago has the toughest schedule. Not only do they play all the interdivisional teams, but the matchups that they have outside of their division with Bakersfield and San Diego. I think it's going to be a tough week for them. And if they don't have a big week, I think both Manitoba and Charlotte are going to give them a good run for their money.
Milwaukee may be the only easy team. Chicago, the only team that they really should beat that they're playing this week. Even Rockford.
Grand Rapids, that should be. I mean, Grand Rapids can upset a lot of teams, so I don't think you can take them too lightly. But Milwaukee and Grand Rapids are two must wins, should wins. But the rest are up in the air for. I think
saying everything that I just said, though, I want to just go over the fact that I will be rooting for Manitoba. And I will be rooting against Chicago, but I do unfortunately think they're going to get in.
Well, I'm sure. I'm sure that's not a surprise to anybody, quite honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I like Manitoba. It's got less to do with Chicago and more to do with Manitoba. I like some of the guys on Manitoba. Except for MG, I think they're all good people. So
yeah, that's probably pretty fair.
And the final. Matchup, Tucson and San Diego. The West has been really interesting to look at this year. Certainly because Stockton has played incredible hockey, but we covered a Texas game last Thursday where they beat Cleveland to finally stop Cleveland's winning streak. Bakersfield has played well. The Gulls, after being taken over by Intro, have been doing tremendously. And Tucson has been there all season long. San Antonio, not too far back, but maybe a little too far back to make the playoffs at this point. But really, you've got 6 teams right there that have been pretty interesting to watch all season long. And San Diego and Tucson, I think, are a pretty interesting matchup coming up this week as well.
Yeah, I mean, all those teams, again, can still figure out a way to get in. I just realized something. As I was thinking this, I had to go look back and make sure. But I'm awfully boring this week because, again, I think it's the 4 that are in right now or the 4 that make it. So I'm a clean sweep in every division. I think that the 4 you see is the 4 you get.
Really? Even with
San Diego? You're going to count out Tucson. They're 1 point back.
Am I going to count them out? No. It's very, very possible. I mean, I could be. It's just as likely for me to be wrong as I am right. But it's just how I feel. The way things have been going, I think that San Diego gets it done, and maybe Tucson can push in. It's very, very possible. But I think it's the 4.
Well, the Western Pacific's got the Western Central as their part of their games this week. So San Diego's got Charlotte, and then Cleveland, and then Texas, Tucson. Right there, those are 4 incredibly tough teams to have to go up against from that division. And then they've got. I'm sorry, not Tucson. They've got Texas, San Diego, and Charlotte I'm sorry, Texas, Cleveland, Chicago, and Charlotte. I'll get this right one of these days. So those 3 teams that you have to deal with right away. Then Tucson in their own division. Then and Ontario. So they've got some games that can loosen them up a little bit to the end. But they've got a tough week. Then they've got to play within their own division and play Stockton towards the end of the week. And Texas, they play Texas Stars twice this week. So that's a tough order for San Diego to have to deal with. And meanwhile, on the other side for Tucson, they've got Milwaukee back-to-back 2 games on Sunday. Then they play San Jose. Then they've got their game against the Gulls on Monday. And then Stockton, Texas once, San Antonio once, Ontario, San Jose again, and then Bakersfield. I think Tucson probably has a little bit. They got to get to play San Jose twice and Milwaukee twice right there. So maybe I don't know. I go against you, Vibes. I think Tucson really has the better route to take the 4th spot.
Okay, you could be wrong. It's fine.
This I don't know. I think this particular division. Well, I'm unlike Vibes, who wants to hide his Calder predictions in the folds of his vagina. I'm going to make a bold prediction.
Wow.
I think that Stockton is going to be a bit of a dark horse, as much as of a dark horse you can be in this with 102 points. But I think that they have a good a chance as any to go all the way to the Calder and win it.
MG, that wasn't very nice of you.
I'm sorry. Hey, you want to play with the big boys? You gotta.
That wasn't very nice. You know that.
Now
well,
listen.
come on. Let's hear these predictions. You don't want to come out
So
and say it.
who was your prediction?
I think Stockton has a good chance to go all the way. That's who I would be putting my money on. I think they're going to surprise a lot of teams.
We could hold. You could say, if you want to say that Stockton is not your pick, Vibes, that's fine. But I think we should save the deeper playoff discussion for next week. Would you consider Stockton being in the finals, possibly?
I'll tell you what. Now that MG is dug into my vagina, I'm just gonna get outed. Stockton was my pick.
Really?
All right. Yes, Stockton was my pick.
MG or
so
reader.
now that you've gotten into my crevice, yes, Stockton is my pick.
Great minds think alike.
Wow.
They got a high flying offense. They got one of the best. Aside from Cleveland, they've got the best goal differential out of any team. And since week 5, they obviously made a few adjustments. They've been almost unstoppable.
Yep, Stockton is my pick. Okay, so good job, MG. Now you ruined everything.
We'll get more detail out of you next week.
Yeah. Dig into my other holes.
Oh, God. Are there any other...
Hi, Mom.
We talked about other teams that could be in trouble, and we've talked a little bit about Chicago. What about Bakersfield? Do we have any concerns about them? Right now, they're at 86 points in that 3rd slot. They're 8 up on San Diego, 9 up on Tucson. Are they legitimately a team that you would think it could be in trouble, or is that something that we're grasping at straws here?
Do you want me to be inflammatory? Exciting, cause suspense vibes? Do you want to be honest?
Do I have a choice?
You got a choice. Honestly, no, I think they're in. That's honestly. But if I was going to build suspense, I'd say absolutely there's a chance they could be on the outside. But I don't think so. I think they're in.
You know who they lost to last week?
Who'd they lose to?
Lehigh Valley.
They might be out, now that I think about it. They could be in trouble.
I think out of teams that are in a playoff spot right now, I think they have one of the more questionable defensive cores. I think that is something that could end up burning them if they do make the playoffs. I think that's going to hold them back from making any moves once they do get in. And they have a pretty tough schedule this week as well.
Yeah, looking at it just a little bit, they're starting off with Chicago. They've got Stockton on Monday. They've got Texas on Tuesday. San Antonio, San Diego on Wednesday. Stockton again on Thursday, and Tucson. So they've got some games this week that could easily be losses for them if they're around 500 and somehow San Diego and Tucson really push it this week. It's possible, but I think even if they are around 500, they make it in. If they go below that, if they wind up losing quite a lot of games this week, Bakersfield could really be in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have it. It's in their. They control their destiny. I mean, they don't
Yeah.
have to worry about what other teams do. They just have to worry about what they do.
So Sibs, MG, I gotta ask you guys, what team that's in it right now is most likely to be out?
Wow. Well, that's part of what we put up there as a poll, didn't we? Which I was
Is
getting
it?
to.
Is that the poll?
I think. Well, we put the poll up there of who are the four most likely to make the playoffs, and you got a chance to pick four on the vote if you go to the LG website. And right now, as you see, out of the teams listed, which four are most likely to make the playoffs, you got a chance to pick four. This poll is closing a little later on tonight, just before our 9:30 game. So when you get a chance, get in there and vote. Right now, as we view the results, we see that Chicago and Bakersfield are tied with 29 votes each, with Manitoba at 23 votes and Springfield at 22 votes. And so these are the teams that, along with probably Tucson, are the most likely. People are thinking San Diego and Bridgeport are the two teams that are not as likely to make it into the playoffs. So that will be very interesting to see if that's how it comes out. But I have to agree. I think Tucson over San Diego at this point may very well be what we're looking at.
Yep, I would hope Manitoba over the Checkers as well. I mean, that's.
I'm sure you would hope.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with that said,
I think the Chicago numbers are a little inflated. I think Madden's may have been logging on to different IPs to inflate the vote.
Wow.
He was putting in stats drunk. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, you can go there and vote. You've got until 9:30 tonight to get on there and vote on that poll. Again, it's out of the teams listed below there on the webpage, which four are most likely to make the playoffs. You get to pick four teams, and again, right now, Chicago, Bakersfield, Manitoba, Springfield lead the voting, and so San Diego and Bridgeport seem to be on the ones on the outs, and may very well be accurate for what's going on in the playoffs. Let's get back to. I want to talk a little bit about the poll that was done last week. Which statements best describe your opinion on the issue of Cleveland's roster moves? And the one that got the most votes at almost 51% was LG should consider rule changes to prevent send-downs like this.
Really?
Yep. The next one.
How many people voted for that one?
56 or 51.
I didn't know
about
they were
51%.
I didn't know there was 56 little girls in the entire league. That's crazy.
Wow. You are. Well, I was going to say you're mean vibes, but I don't know if there's any difference, quite honestly, between vibes and mean vibes.
56.
I personally agree. I think. I mean, I don't think you should be stopping teams from being able to send down players 100%. But I mean, even the NHL. I mean, once the trade deadline goes, they only have so many transactions they can make, call-ups and send-downs. You shouldn't be able to turn over your entire roster down to your AHL team. It's just not. They want to keep on par with the realism of the NHL. That's just not. It's not realistic.
The next most votes, Vibes, was your suggestion. That's life. Get over it and move on. With
How
42
many
votes.
people?
Voted
There's
42 votes on that one.
42 guys in the league who know what they're talking about. Gotta love it.
How many of those were yours?
Oh, you want to dig into? All
So you
right.
have 40 other accounts then.
Yeah.
And then coming in third was Pest did what he needed for his organization with 29 votes. So it was it was an interesting vote. It wasn't, and to me, this is not an attack on Cleveland so much as it is on what you're allowed to do within the league. And in a way, guys, I kind of like that the vote turned out this way because it says that there may be some semblance of hope that we do have some level heads in the league who understand that it's not Cleveland's fault, quote unquote, for what they did. It's the rule. It's what they're allowed to do. And again, a lot of guys were talking about it in the shout box, and we've talked about it on the show. Plenty of other teams since then have done the same thing, have called up and sent down guys. That's the bigger discussion. What's allowed, is that what it should be? And we could probably talk about this for hours because it is an interesting topic.
Yeah. With the risk of bringing the whole thing up again, I can tell you this, Sibs, that so the rules are perfectly in line with reality. And what I mean by that is if you were to look at hockey, right, like real actual hockey, NHL, AHL, in real life,
right,
and try and draw a parallel to this league, they are in line. And if you guys want further explanation, I can actually do that for you. I'm willing to bring you guys into a channel and explain it to you slowly. If you have a board, I could write it down and draw you pictures. But it is in line with real hockey. I just do want to say that.
Well, yeah,
somewhat, I guess.
Yes and no. I mean, I think you have to admit that, it's you're not sending down some of your best young players from the NHL to the AHL all the time. It may be guys who were, the last couple of guys on the roster who made it up, who are getting playing time on the fourth line, maybe the third line. You guys aren't going to go anywhere, so they've only been around for a short amount of time on the NHL team. Those are the guys who get sent down. You're not sending down, you're not sending down big players who've been around for a while. It just doesn't happen.
Right.
I mean, the NHL, they sent down Connor McDavid last season when they didn't make the playoffs, right? That
right. And that's what I'm saying. And I was actually going to.
They didn't send down Connor McDavid. That's what I'm saying.
I was gonna. Well, no. Okay. No. That's not what I'm saying. What I was gonna use him as an example. Number one, if they wanted to, they could. You do know that, right? Because he has a 2-way contract until the ELC or whatever it is kicks in. I forget how it actually goes. But if they wanted to, they could actually send him down. That's first and foremost. And number two is, with all due respect again to Tryhard and Poopin and whoever else was sent down, they're not Connor McDavid. They're more, a Jonathan Drouin or a Weinberg or even an Anthony Duclair or a Pavel Buchnevich. They're not, hit the ground running number one overall generational talent. They're kids that are going to try and make the team. And if they can't make the team, they get sent down. So it's perfectly in line with reality.
But you don't see an NHL team not make the playoffs and then send down half their roster to their AHL team. It doesn't happen in reality. And they can't do it. Once the trade deadline happens, they have so many transactions that they can make, and they need to save those transactions for. And it's different. I mean, you can't parallel it to the real life NHL.
Well, it's true because you have injuries that you have to deal with too. So it's
exactly.
The more likely you're going to lose players in the real hockey league, and certainly you don't do that while the season's still going on in the NHL. A big reason they don't do that is because they still want people coming out to their games, so they still want those big names up there playing, whether they're in the playoffs or not. And so there is that difference, but there's just also other, there's other chemistry that you're trying to build up as a real NHL team. So you want those guys to still be there. There are a lot of different variables, and it's understandable that, yeah, I get it, but why we do it, why we allow it, but they have to. I want somebody to at least think about what it means to then move a bunch of players out at the trade deadline who have brought you there, who have gotten your team to first or close to first, and all of a sudden they're moved out because we're bringing NHLers down, and even worse, you're bringing guys up to the big club because you don't want to release them, but you don't want them on your AHL team.
Yeah, these guys aren't getting called up to the NHL because they're good and they're going to help the NHL team. They're there because they're not as good as the guys that are being sent down, and they're just basically filling a roster
That
spot.
is the one. That is the one thing that I would say, if anything, can use an adjustment. That's not realistic. Sending a guy up, just to clear up space, because from what I understand, there's a restriction placed on the league, right, to where you can't send anybody down. Is that correct? Right after a certain amount of time, there's a restriction. So, like, you can't send a guy down that has an A status or something to the prospects, to the training camp. So they send them up instead. That's not real. That's not realistic. And that's, in my opinion, that is sort of exploitation. And I've done it before. So it's not like, I'm not saying that it doesn't get done, because I've done it myself. But that's the only thing that's not realistic, if you ask me. And sending a guy down, or whatever the case may be, PES doesn't have to sell tickets, and maybe that kind of goes to your argument a little bit, to the fact that it's not completely realistic because he doesn't have to keep people in the stands, so there's really no incentive for him to keep guys in the lineup, so he can send them down. But aside from that, it's perfectly within line. And anyone who says otherwise is wrong.
I just think that, I understand that the AHL and the NHL are connected, but, it punishes AHL teams that have good NHL teams. Chances are they're going to lose some of their guys, even being called up to the NHL, but they're definitely not getting anybody sent down. So you put together a good team, and so does your NHL. You both have good teams, and a team that who has a shit NHL team that can't do anything sends down all their best players, and all of a sudden is a powerhouse. What does that say for the actual process of putting together your own team? There should be an asterisk beside Cleveland's name should they go on to win the cup this year, in my opinion.
There are sliders here that can be adjusted, right? There are things that can be. The rule is the rule, and it's okay, but you don't have to open up the entire fire hose. You can govern this a little bit by what's the deadline to be able to do this. How many players should you or should you not be allowed to send down? There are things that can be done to limit the wholesale swap out of a team or most of a team. And I think that's what the league should look into. Not saying you can or can't do this. I think you have to allow this to happen. But to what extent do you allow it? How many players should be able to come down from the NHL in any given season, and to what deadline date should you allow it to happen? I don't understand why it shouldn't have stopped right after the trade deadline, and that's one of those things we have to talk about.
If there's something that could be done, what I could see being done, honestly, is if you send a guy down like they did, they have to spend X amount of games in the AHL next season.
Sure.
You get what I'm saying?
Sure.
So in other words, yes, you want to send them down. You have to designate a conditioning stint, is what we'll call it. You know what I mean? You send them on a conditioning stint, and it lasts for X amount of games, which doesn't kick in until next season, which could maybe make these owners think twice about sending a guy down. You know,
I mean,
so
I think going forward, as we get deeper into season 6, season 7, I think there's going to be less and less players able to be shifted up and down throughout the teams just because of their statuses. And I think it'll probably end up being a problem that solves itself, um, assuming that the amount of players in the league doesn't drop dramatically as far as the turnover with new players.
Right. And that might be the case too. I mean, we assume that a lot of the veterans who've been around are going to stick around for quite a few more seasons, and it's possible. But if not, and I think LG for the most part has been pretty good about okay, where are we in PSN, and what do we have to do to adjust? I mean, this is what we normally do in Xbox, but it can't work here because of whatever the reason is. We we don't have enough guys who are veterans. We need to be able to use prospects elsewhere, right? We've done that in prior seasons. And so they try to adjust, but this is one of those instances where I think they need to, and you might be right, MG, it might adjust itself in a couple of seasons, but I think it's still going to be a problem for another season or two. And
Yep, I agree.
what do you do to lessen this? Because again, to what you guys are saying, if you can put together a team that barely plays well enough to make the playoffs, but the NHL team has the NHL team has a bunch of talent that isn't going to make the playoffs, all of a sudden that AHL team winds up being a major contender if they get all these send downs. And you know, we've seen that happen in other seasons, and you know, we could easily see it happen again this season too. Well, I think we've probably exhausted that topic and just about every other one of them at this point. You've got, like I said, you got the poll tonight to talk about what teams you want to vote on, who's going to make the playoffs. Hit that up on the LG website. Go ahead, Vibes. You had something to say?
I was just going to say we've exhausted it within reason of this show. I think, honestly, I think it's something that we could probably go on and on about for probably another 7 to 8 hours and still not come to a conclusion. But for this show, for the purpose of this show, maybe yes. But that's definitely something that should. I think that's going to keep. You know, people are going to keep coming back to that, and there's going to be a lot of different opinions and a lot of debate to be had. So.
And I think we'll have the opportunity to do that. We've talked about this, and certainly when we do a year-end wrap-up show, we'll talk about what went on in the season, of course. But we've got a bunch of other things to talk about. We want to talk about this rule. We want to talk about a possibility of an AHL draft. We want to talk about the rule book in general, which I'm sure is going to piss a lot of people off, but we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the esports hockey competition. There's going to be a bunch of topics that we're going to have in that last show. And if you've got any suggestions at all, please send it to tsibs88 on LG. Be more than happy to try and hit a lot of topics. Maybe we'll do a second off-season show where we can actually get some of LG management in to talk about possible rule changes and why or why not it would happen. I think that's the road we're heading down. Hopefully, you'll have some good ideas to share as well.
Yeah, I was telling a few guys I was talking to last night that once the season is over, that we're going to put out an end of the year show, and definitely don't miss that because everything that you're thinking about, we're going to talk about.
Yeah, a lot of the big topics this season certainly will come under fire when we wind up doing that show. We're just about finished here, guys. Parting shots, week 9. What, MG, you in Manitoba, up to you guys, I guess, pretty much, if you make it in there. What are you guys thinking about leading into tonight's games?
Just doing what we know how to do and making sure we win the games that we were supposed to win and hopefully steal a couple that we're not. I think it's gonna. I'm thinking it's gonna come right down to the final game and the final night. And it's gonna be fun to see. It's gonna be fun to watch.
Vibes, what are you thinking about for the coming week?
Let's go Moose. I'm going to be rooting for the Moose. Come on, get out there and get him, MG. I'm on. Listen, I'm rooting for you guys. which is probably why you're going to lose. But I'm rooting.
We'll try not to disappoint you, Vibes.
All right.
I
I'll
think
be
that's
rooting.
I think that's a vote of confidence, sort of. Really, I
Yeah.
guess. I don't know what you would call it.
It's a vote of, get out there and get them. Go ahead.
It's a vote of
Right.
some kind.
Make me right about the Wolves. Get them out of here.
All right, MG Vibes. Thanks again as usual. We'll talk to you both next week. That's it for this week on AHL PSN this week. Week 9 is starting up in a few hours. Good luck to everybody who has a chance to still make the playoffs. And for those of you who are just playing for some pride, go out there and enjoy yourself in the final week. We'll talk to you all next week.